So today's session is going to be covering several parts. I'm going to try and split it down because getting organised is a massive topic. I have spent probably half of my med school life and previous degree and A-levels going through loads of YouTube videos, listening to loads of podcasts, reading loads of books, which I'll share with you in this to try and figure out how to get myself organised. I still am not claiming to be an expert and I haven't fully cracked it, but a lot of people say I am a very organised person. And so, yeah, this is this talk. So I've split it up into the basics, general principles, key references to get you going on your way. So that's where I'll share some of the main references that I've used that I think have really kind of tailored how I approach getting organised and how I run things within my life to get everything done. And then I'll look at applying it in med school or within a degree and actually studying. I'll address some common questions and some of the challenges we face, 3 of them. If you have any more, I'll address those at the end. And then we'll look at applying all of this into your life. So you're obviously not just a med student, although just is, I don't like using that word, but you have a lot of other things going on in your life. So you either do sports, you have a job, you have children, you have family, friends to think of. And so I'll be looking at that as well and talking about that very briefly. So the basics and general principles. So I'll talk about common pitfalls actually as I go through this, because a nice way to think about it is kind of where we've gone wrong, because I'm sure we have all tried to get our lives together at some point in time. We're all in our degrees at this point. So I'm sure there's been times where you've tried to get everything done in one day or planned it out and it's either gone wrong or you just have come today because you just want a little bit of extra advice. So a common thing that a lot of people complain about is that they just aren't able to do it. And a lot of the reasoning behind that is because they seem to be following another person's preset routine. So a lot of people on Instagram, a lot of influencers, a lot of YouTubers like to put out really great videos that are helpful, but the problem is that they are tailored to them. And what I'm going to try to do today is avoid that by kind of pushing that you should be applying this to your own life and making your own kind of organizational hack or scheduling process based on your own lives. So this is just one example that's quite a common one that people have used or applied. But the thing that it doesn't factor in is, for example, if you have a job. What if you're somebody who works at a bar at the end of the day? And I know it seems very straightforward to some people, you can just reschedule those blocks, but to a lot of people, they might just apply this and then find it very hard to stick to. And because it's hard to stick to, abandon it, and then you're in the same spot that you were always in. So it looks different for everybody, which is really important to remember. The solution that I have to this is make sure to individualize, something that I like to do before I even start to organize my life. Even though I'm an organized person, this is something to be very, very aware of. You will go through phases where life just falls apart and you have a lot of stuff going on and you need to kind of re-look at things and say, okay, I need to go back and make a new plan. So when I get to that point, I often look at what my routine is actually like. So spend a week, which is what I advise, just logging, getting a nice little diary or putting notes in your phone of how you actually use your time. I call this the 24-hour challenge. So I write down how I use my 24 hours. So the first week I just log kind of what I'm doing that week. So whether I'm going to work, whether I'm studying or doing study hub, I don't know what other things people can have on, sports, etc. And then I kind of split into averages. This is a very long-winded way to do it, but this is how I've done it, which really helps me because I'm quite an extra person. And a lot of people who've used this technique from my recommendation have found it quite useful as well. You then split your 24 hours you then kind of map out 24 hours and you split them into chunks of what matters to you. So for example, for me, I know that I need at least 7 hours of sleep. So 20 out of my 24 hours, 7 hours is already gone. And then I split and chunk everything else into how I would spend an average 24-hour day. Now, this is just a general gauge of how I would spend a day at the moment. It fluctuates, and I'll show you an example of my 24 hours today. So I use Notion and then I split my 24 hours into this. You don't have to do something so extreme, but I find it quite hard when I'm doing my daily kind of plan of how I'm going to do things. I find it quite hard to map it to an actual day. So previously, before doing this, I would do things like schedule in too much, so I wouldn't have enough time in a day to do all the tasks that I've set myself. So doing it hour by hour really helps me. But then going back to doing it into this blocking method, so you don't have to take it to the next step, I've done it, you can just do it into this blocking method, helps me think about how much time I'm actually giving to something, so that I make sure that I have time for other things. And thinking about your grey time or travel time, so I've separated travel and grey time, although some people put travel into grey time. Grey time is just like dead time. That, so for example, eating breakfast in the morning, getting out of bed, making your bed, all of those things are just grey time. Cooking dinner, where time just goes. And as you can see, 4 hours seems like a lot, but when you actually block it out, you spend a lot more time just faffing during the day to stay alive than you actually realize. So I've separated my travel and my grey time because I live in central London and my uni's quite about an hour away. So it takes me about an hour either side. So I put 2 hours, and for most placements that I go to, that works for me as well. So I've got 2 hours. So what I was saying before was that blocking might be an easier way for you to do it, but if you still find blocking challenging on a daily basis, you could then move into, or a weekly basis. So if your week stays roughly the same every day, you can block it out into what you do hour by hour. And that helps me stay on track. So when assessing your day, so going back to when you're thinking of your first week of just assessing how you're living and what time, how much you spend on different things. So thinking about if you have a job, do you have to schedule that in? How many hours a week do you work? Doing it on a week base is really good because you get a general overview. I don't think everyone has the exact same schedule every day, especially weekends versus weekdays. So doing it as an average works quite well. So you're able to actually think of how many hours you need to allocate per day to different things. What time of day do you study best? So some people study best in the morning, some people study best in the evenings. What time of day is best to get some activity in? Now, getting activity, I'll come to probably in next week's session, is really, really important because it really helps on motivation and staying strong. You need to get away from your studies. You need to do something away from uni. So making sure you're thinking about kind of trying to slot that in to your time somehow. How much sleep do you need to function well? Not everyone needs 7 hours. Some people need 8, some people need 10, some people need 5. Think about what's healthy for you, how you function well. There's loads of apps that you can get, or if you have one of those smartwatch things that can monitor your sleep and see if you want to take it to the extreme. You do not need to be this extra, I need to stress that. But you can do things like find out how well you're sleeping. So the app that I've got with my sleep app, it brings me up a question in the morning to ask me if I feel refreshed or not, and then it judges that based on what time I went to sleep and my heart rate and all sorts of fancy things that I don't understand. But figuring that out is also very useful, and I've set on 7 hours. I don't always get it, but I try to. And then if you have to travel, how far do you have to travel, for how long, and also what can this time be used for? As I said, we have grey time, and I've mentioned that I've separated travel and grey time, but I still treat my travel as grey time. So I think about what kind of things I can do in the time that I'm spending traveling. So things like podcasts, there's loads of apps that you can use nowadays for studying, or maybe you just like to chill during your travel time. And if that's the case, maybe something like if you have Netflix, downloading the app. And what's really cool about the Netflix app, which I'm telling you only because I figured it out a couple of weeks ago, is that you can pre-download loads of stuff so that you can watch it when you're on the train or when you're in places without Wi-Fi. So that can be a useful thing that you're doing in a time when you'd otherwise be trying to avoid eye contact with the stranger opposite you on the train. So things like that are just useful to think about when doing that. The second pitfall, oh gosh, I've spent a long time talking about the first pitfall, I'll speed up. So the second pitfall is getting organised but never following through. And this is something that I did for a very, very long time. I would make to-do lists, set them, plan out my life, and then I would just redo it. So I would plan, stress, be happy about the plan that I've made, live life for a little bit, and then realize that I haven't actually done anything. I told myself at the beginning of the year I would study 2 hours every day, and then never actually did it. So the solution to that is quite simple, but it's to do it, but make what you're doing attractive. So rather than setting yourselves to-do lists like that are crazy long, or rather than setting yourselves goals that are unattainable for where you're at in life right now, take baby steps. So build rather than going straight into where you want to be. So if you're the kind of person who currently has things a little bit all over the place, you're struggling to keep on top of things, it's really not worth trying to jump straight to that 24-hour hourly blocking technique that I said, because that just won't work for you. It has taken me almost a year to get to the place where I actually stick to my schedule and adjusting that schedule to make it work for me and developing that 24-hour technique. So taking baby steps that work for you and apply to your life is something that will help start straight away. And by making it attractive, reward yourself. So set goals for the week and reward yourself for that. So something that I did for the gym, I used to hate working out and going to the gym. But when I read a book called Atomic Habits, which I'll talk about in a second, it talked about doing something small and doing it every day for a little time and then building it up. So at first I would do 5 minutes of abs in the morning. I do not have a six-pack, but so that bit was a lie. But I would do 5 minutes of abs a day and then work my way up. And now I actually spend time in the gym. But by doing a small, tiny bit of improvement every day, in the course of a year, you do a hell of a lot better than you'd think. And you've logged a lot of more hours in doing that task than you would have thought of. And that can apply to studying too. So whether you do you learn one condition a day, or you do 10 questions a day, so you log in to past tests and you just do 10 SBAs, that's better than doing nothing. And those 10 added up over a year, so over, let's say, 200 days, because an actual academic year isn't as long as 365, but you would have got a whole lot further than what you would have accomplished if you just delayed and delayed and delayed, because you set yourself 50 SBAs to do and you just never did them because it's unattractive to sit down and do 50 SBAs. And then come exam season, you would have realized I set my target of doing 500 SBAs or completing all the SBAs on past test, but I haven't done any of them. And now I need to do 500 a day to get to my target. So kind of taking it pace by pace is really useful. Pitfall number 3 is unrealistic goals. And that kind of ties in with number 1 in continuously getting organized and then just continuously reorganizing yourself. Because the longer your to-do list, the more unattractive it's going to be. So I already said that in the first one, and making it attractive. But another thing with that is it's, as I said, unappealing. It demotivates you, and there's something called the amygdala hijack. So when it comes to talking about the amygdala hijack, there is a link which I'll share with you at the end. But I have stolen a few words from an article that's written, which again I will share with you. But the basic principle is that when it comes to your, let's say, procrastination, it's essentially a method of coping with a stressor. So your to-do list or your task becomes a stress. And if your to-do list or your task becomes a stress, your brain will dissociate between your present self and your future self. So usually as a day-to-day, you plan thinking about your future self and where you want to be. So right now you're thinking, I've attended this session because I want to pace myself through the year, learn techniques to then get through my exam season a lot more easily than I would have or have done in the past. When it comes to actually doing your to-do list and on the day, you've set a long to-do list and it gets to the day and you just decide Netflix is a lot easier. And it sounds very straightforward, but your brain essentially detaches itself from the present and the future, and it says, this is future me's problem. Today, I just need to protect myself from the stress I'm under. So if you set yourself scary things, your brain will automatically want to do the easier task, which would be watching Netflix, and it avoids doing the task that you've set. So this just basically explains what I said, but the solution would be mindfulness. One of the techniques is tapping, so I'll give a video to it. It seems really silly. Well, I thought it seemed really silly sat at my desk doing it, but it's very helpful. And just spending 2 minutes of your time doing that can be really useful for setting yourself in the right mind space for doing something. Mindfulness is also really good, and I'll get to that in a second. But the most obvious is just making your tasks more approachable. So rather than setting yourself a huge list, which is just horrible to look at, make it small. At least you'll get something done. You don't need to get everything done today. Mindfulness, in regards to mindfulness, Headspace is a brilliant app. You can also get a lot of stuff for free on Headspace. So I actually don't have the paid Headspace version, but there's a lot of specific 2-minute mindfulness talk-throughs, which will help you breathe or just, you know, just have a moment of silence. And it's really useful. Some of them are specific to studying, some of them are specific to stressing out, some of them are specific to feeling overwhelmed. They have a lot of resources available for free. And I use those mid-studies just to take 2 minutes out or 5 minutes out. Another useful thing about Headspace is that a lot of their resources you can tailor down to how much time you want to give it. So you can choose between 3, 5 or 10 minutes for most of them, I believe. And so that's really useful if you're studying and you're taking a break out. I've just seen a little a comment in the chat about being able to get Headspace free through your NHS email. I didn't know that that was still going. I know in lockdown they did do that, and I think it has expired, but I will double check and send an email out if it hasn't, which means that you should be able to get it premium. The next pitfall is failing to prepare. So wonderful quote you can all read, but the obvious solution is to prepare. But what does it mean to prepare? Small things like getting a list ready the day before is very useful. Prepping the things you need for the next day. So I'm going to use gym a lot because I have a very bad relationship with exercise. But something that I do which helps me motivate me to go to the gym is set my gym bag up, have my gym clothes there, because in the morning I wake up, I'm more of an evening gym person, but I've tried to go in the morning for a long time. And I'll have it there ready for me so that I can look at it as I wake up and I know that it's there. It's one less thing to do to get me to the gym. But that's the same thing with preparing your workspace. So having your desk ready, I always, no matter how tired I am, declutter my desk at the end of every day. And that's the same with at the start of every day, I make my bed. And that's just 2 habits. I think they do it in the army, and there's a lot of psychology behind it. But things like that get you in the right mindset to get your day started on the right track. Another thing that's actually quite good is moving in the morning. So whether it's exercise or another activity to move. So I tend to, quite embarrassingly, dance in the morning. So I'll put on my favorite song and have a dance out in the kitchen while I'm making my breakfast. That just gets my blood pumping. I'm happy. I'm in the right mood to then get on with my day. So that's just a couple of things in that one. Another common pitfall is not being willing to change your technique. So a lot of people start something and they just keep going, regardless of the fact of whether it's working or not working. Be open to not getting it right the first time and changing your technique, trying something else, doing something else that might be useful for you. So if you stay on the same thing for a long time, even though it's true that a lot of habits take time to build, that is true, there is an obvious difference between something that you just don't enjoy and doesn't suit your life versus something that's taking time to build that you will eventually get to and you will eventually just do naturally without even thinking about it, versus something that you just won't get on with and doesn't apply to you at all. Some people are like me and they do their days hour by hour. Other people couldn't think of anything worse, and are less of a list person and more of a time blocking person or more of a task prioritizing person. And just on the point about building habits, I'll go through this again when we talk about James Clear and Atomic Habits, but it takes a long time to build a habit. So for some people it can take 3 weeks, and it's also habit and person dependent, so depending on the task, but it can take between 3 weeks to 3 months to build a habit, and that's at the point where it just becomes automatic. So my 5-minute abs in the morning, for a long time I had to think about it, I had to actively decide I wanted to do it, and now I just wake up and do it, and it feels weird if I don't do it. And it actually does I feel like there's something missing. It's almost like brushing my teeth or something. If I walk out of the house without having done my ab workout 5-minute thing, it's not always abs, it's other things, like 5 minutes of exercise, I feel weird. And in terms of the application of all of this, so just going over everything I've talked about in terms of the 5 pitfalls, assess your routine, time block based on how you work, and keep it clear in your head what it is you need to get done. When it comes to knowing what you need to get done, then organize it into a list. So there's the, I can't believe I've forgotten the 4 squares. I use them all the time. Do now, do later, do, anyway, I'll talk about it mention it at the end. I think it's in my next talk, which is why I haven't got the image up. But think about the tasks that you actually need to do. Are they important and urgent to do today or for tomorrow? Or are they important tasks but not necessary to get right away? Or are they less important tasks that you can kind of keep delaying, but you want to get them done? Prioritize and then set that as part of how you're going to organize and get them done. And then make sure you actually do the tasks so you're not falling down the trap of just continuously reorganizing. And then once you've done all of that, make sure you go back and reflect. Is this actually working for me? Don't be stubborn. Don't stay in something that's not working for you. If lists don't work for you, don't do lists. Find another way to do it. So yeah, with all of that, my top tips. Prepare for things not to go to plan, leave off days. So I always leave one day off. My day off is also my catch-up day. So I'm just going to be very honest, that's not the right way to do it. But my day off is also my catch-up day, but I don't have enough days in the week to have one day off and one catch-up day at the moment. And that's just life. You have to figure out what works for you. But a catch-up day is really good so that you don't end up stressed and so that you can actually have a day off when you plan to have a day off. And remember, the tortoise won the race, not the hare. So you don't need to jump straight to being a pro straight away. In terms of my references, I'd really recommend, if you're a book person, so I have different types of references here to, so you can choose what works for you. But if you're a book person, Atomic Habits is absolutely brilliant to read to get you kind of thinking about how you might want to approach building new habits that last. It's also very easy to read. So I'm not really a book kind of person. I try to be, but this is one that I read in a couple of days, and it's just a really lovely book to read. It also has an Audible version. I don't know about the others, but I really liked this book and I was really struggling to read kind of the first few days. And once I got into it, I loved it. But there was a point where I checked if they had Audible, and this one does. The 5 a.m. Club is also another good book. It's more of so Atomic Habits actually talks you through how to build habits, whereas the 5 a.m. Club is more of a story. And along the way, the characters teach you all these lessons and how to apply them. And it's quite fun to kind of go through the story and you get caught into that and all the characters that they've built. A disclaimer though, you don't actually have to wake up at 5 a.m. like the book tells you to. So don't worry about that putting you off reading it. It has some other great lessons outside of just telling you to wake up at 5 a.m. If you're more of a YouTube person, Thomas Frank is absolutely brilliant. He has a lot of really good videos on study techniques, staying on track, and just ways to get the most out of the tasks that you're doing. His videos tend to also be quite short, so he tends to watch other videos that are quite popular or critique techniques, study techniques, and other kind of, general study tools that people use, and he summarizes it into 5 or 10 minute videos, which is quite useful for people who don't like spending hours and hours of time listening to things. Ali Adal is also really good. He's also a medic, so he has a lot of older videos on how to study when he first started, and then there's also Skillshare classes on developing skills as well. If you're more of an Instagram person, I personally really do like Faye. I know everybody has different people that they kind of look to, but I find her content really relatable. She's a good laugh, and I think she's one of the kind of medical influencer type people who spend a lot of time kind of sharing openly about how they study. So you tend to see a lot of the stuff which a lot of people tend to hide. She also kind of does a lot of tips on her study techniques and sharing that kind of stuff, and does a lot of day in the lives of, so that's useful there. In terms of podcasts, Beyond the To-Do List is a really good one. You can read all of this. I'll happily share my slides. And the Tim Ferriss Show. If you prefer newsletters or you don't want to spend money on the Atomic Habits book, James Clear also does a newsletter, 321, where he shares 3 short ideas, 2 quotes, and 1 question every single Thursday. And that's a really, really fab newsletter to read if you are interested. So now on to the bit which I'm sure you're all here for, applying this to medicine and studying in general. So I'm using Thomas Frank here, which I've already talked to you about as one of the YouTubers. I think he's brilliant. But one of the study techniques, which he's adapted from Mark Lobdell, which you can also watch his it's a really good video on YouTube, but I think it's like 1 hour and 10 minutes long. I've watched it, it's absolutely fantastic. And if you like Thomas Frank's 6-minute video on this, the 1 hour, 10-minute video that Mark goes through is also really, really good, and kind of just goes into a bit more detail. But the main concepts that they all talk about in that is breaking things into chunks, creating a dedicated study area, studying actively, taking smart notes, and then expanding, summarizing on what you've learned, and then using resources correctly. So in terms of breaking things into chunks, this is how we approach studying. So there's the Pomodoro technique, there's loads of other adaptations of that. Something that I use is the 10-2 × 5. So over an hour, it's a way to break up an hour of revision. I tend to have a very short attention span, so studying for 30 minutes I actually find quite hard, unless it's something I absolutely really love. But for some people, studying for 30 minutes is quite easy. But if it's not, there is the 10-2 × 5 technique, which is where you spend 10 minutes doing your studying, you have a 2-minute break, and then you do that 5 times, and in an hour you've covered 50 minutes of revision. Another good reason I like doing that is because if I have too long a break, I just end up continuing that break for the rest of the day, and I don't actually do much. So 2 minutes is just enough time for me to do a mindfulness thing with Headspace, or for me to do some star jumps in the kitchen, or make a cup of tea. Also, having a break agenda is quite good. So by that, I mean, and again, you don't need to do this. This is just something I do that helps me. But without all of this organization, I'm the kind of person that would fall apart. So I tend to have a break agenda. I don't write a to-do list for all of my breaks, but I know that in my breaks, within an hour, I normally have a single cup of tea. So one of my breaks is going to be making a cup of tea. I know I have a lot of cups of tea in a day. And other than that, I'm going to make sure that I'm doing star jumps or I'm doing something active. And one of them is also going to be for kind of a headspace, just breathing or just doing some breaths or tapping, so that during a 1 hour, I've done at least 3 different things. I've made a cup of tea, I've done some star jumps, I've done some breathing, and it keeps me on track, it keeps me refreshed. Or going on a walk. So if you're doing the longer Pomodoro technique, or some people do 20 minutes, 10 minutes, you can have a lot more time to do something like going on a walk. Thinking of your environment is also really good. I've spent a long time making my desk environment so I don't actually know what you can see because I can't see myself. But I have a lot of plants around me because I like greenery. I'm also by a door, so my study space is actually in the kitchen. That works for me because I tend not to do activities, I tend not to do too much studying in the evenings. I tend to do study hub stuff in the evenings, which is where I'm happy to be disturbed. So I live with my mum, and my mum comes home in the evenings, otherwise she works at work. And that means that during the day I can spend time at my desk, which is the perfect environment for me to study. I have all the greenery that I love, fresh air flowing through, it's really well lit in the kitchen. And then in the evenings, it also encourages me to have a bit of family time, and to make sure that I've done all my studying the day, because if it was in my room, I would be more tempted to spend well into the early hours studying. But the kitchen is more comfortable because it's also communal space. So there's different things. I know for some people that specific thing won't work because you live in student accommodation or things like that with a shared house, but there's also the libraries and things like that that you can do. Studying actively. So make sure that you are doing things that actively use your brain. Don't just passively come to, this includes a study hub lecture, and just sit there and listen. You won't gain anything from it. I'll talk about making effective notes in the next slide, but notes is a way that you can make it active. Even if you're not a note person, you can write some notes as you're going through, just to make sure you're listening as you go along and you're writing some key words down. Making sure that you're then going through later and thinking about what you've learned. So something like Anki is really good because you've got the active recall aspect of it. And then teaching something. You will not forget something once you have spent time actually teaching it as a concept. If you aren't the kind of person who has people you can teach it to, which I don't think is a really good excuse, you could literally teach it to anybody. You can either make a study group with friends and do it, or you can use it. So a lot of people end up going to PBL groups, or problem-based learning or case-based learning, depending on what university you're at. You have some form of group work. You can use that time to teach concepts according to what your university expects you to learn during those sessions. But also, if you have no one to teach it to, another thing that I used to do, because I wasn't really a group learning kind of person earlier on in the years of school, I used to do my revision notes as actual PowerPoint presentations. So I've got hundreds of PowerPoint presentations on concepts that I find difficult to learn. That way I'm kind of structuring them ready to be able to teach it. But it also helps because later on in my career, you get portfolio credits for teaching. I can use those slides in teaching to be able to get some portfolio credits as well, so it doubles up. And when I'm doing those PowerPoints, because I'm making them as if I'm teaching somebody, I go into a lot more detail studying it to make sure I understand it. Taking effective notes, and take effective notes based on how you learn. However, if you're not the kind of person to write notes, even just having notes in lecture halls, or if you're the kind of person who goes to online lectures, so like Study Hub, or I know QuesMed does some online ones, there's loads of other people now who do online lectures as well, so Bite Medicine and loads of other groups. Find what works for you, but in all of those sessions, make sure that you're actively engaging. So even just having a paper and scribbling something down, you can throw that away. Even if you're not a note person, the fact that you're sat there listening and then having to do another thing while you listen will increase what's retained by the end of it. Don't throw that paper away straight away. Use that paper and then maybe go away at the end of the session, have a bit of a 10-minute break or so, come back to it and just go over that and quickly make sure you understand what's on there, and then throw it away and come back to kind of what you've learned a week later. So minor Study Hub plug here, but with Study Hub, for example, what you could use is the study pack. So this is where the study packs come in. So you go to you've learnt it in the pre-recording, you've then done some active studying because you've gone to the exam cram, and then a week after the exam cram, the study packs will be released and you can go through the notes and make sure that you're with it. And if you're not, you can go back to the recordings and kind of re-go through them. But taking away from the Study Hub plug, you can do that on your own. So you can do the same thing with a QuesMed lecture or a Bite Medicine lecture, for example, and with your own university lectures. You just have to make sure that you're the one actively doing it. Obviously, Study Hub's packaged it that way to make it easier. That's just how we've structured this year. And using your resources effectively. So I've only put survey down here because I think question, read, recite and review are a bit more obvious. But in terms of surveying, whenever I study something, whenever I approach a condition, I always found it really hard to actually start. So I don't know what universities people are from in this session today, but at St. George's, which is the university I go to, we get a priority list, and I would try to have a focus of the week. So I'd try to focus on cardiology one week. It would take me days to go into cardiology because it's just such a massive topic, and I'd be like, where do I even start? What condition do I start learning? And that would put me off. So in terms of using resources effectively and kind of approaching that into studying, something that I started to do was I bought a question bank. At the time I used QuesMed and Past Medicine, and I would go through on Past Medicine just a random bunch of questions so I could get a good idea of what actually I need to know for an exam, because there's a big difference between cardiology and cardiology in a medical school exam, and finding out what comes up commonly, what kind of the way they ask questions then helped me look into how I actually need to go into cardiology and study it. My results would be awful, my percentage would be heartbreaking sometimes, but it would help me get a good idea. I'd then go and do some questions, I would do some reading around the questions. I would not recite is a bit of a weird word. This is how the YouTube video I was talking about before explains it with Mark. But recite is more kind of your active recall for me. So that's what I would do, so Anki or something like that. And then review later on, just going back over your notes and just making sure you're aware. You can also use mnemonics, which are really good. So there's multiple different ways. They're not just, the one I've got at the bottom, read that damn cadaver book. So it's not just that. There's multiple ways of doing it. Music, I don't know if anybody remembers the periodic table song or the planet song, or rhyme or whatever it was, of ways to remember things. But I will never forget the planets, even though I know there's a new order since I was in primary school. But I learnt that song in primary school and I'm never going to forget it. And then there's also other ways. So a lot of people use names. There's a lot of different types of mnemonics in medicine that you can use to remember things. But this is a really, really good way to recall information in an exam when you're stuck. And it's really helpful because a lot of the times our questions are SBA or multiple choice. So the answer is there. You just have to find a way of remembering it. These are just other ones. So if you're the kind of person who uses images, PicMonic is really good. So it has, if you have like a condition like hypertension, they'll have loads of images which can help your brain think and piece together what it actually looks like and what are the important things to remember about that. So when it comes to studying in med school, I think the biggest problem is the fact that there's multiple different ways to learn. There's different exams that you have to prepare for. So you have to prepare for your OSCEs, practical skills, and you also have to prepare for a written exam. And within the OSCEs, there's clinical and communication skills that you need to think about. So you have to kind of address all of that in some way and get through the year. And on top of all of this, there's lots of knowledge that you have to gain. My solution is being flexible and open to multiple learning opportunities. And again, it seems really like a really simple, silly point to say, but at the beginning of my T year, which is the St. George's, the first clinical year at St. George's, you get multiple things. You get clinical skill teaching, communication skill teaching, you get PBL, you get placement. You also get this thing called IOD, which is kind of more pathophysiology, and also a few other things that it goes over. But each of those has a different way of teaching you. However, it all repeats a lot of the things a lot of the time. So being open to saying, you know what, this method that I use isn't going to work for everything. So a lot of the pre-med stuff, you can tend to go away, write notes, look at those notes, put them into Anki. That's not going to work for everything. You might be the person that it works for everything, but I highly doubt that you have one technique that is good for practicing stuff for OSCEs, communication, clinical skills, and your general clinical knowledge. So you might be the kind of person who writes notes, goes over them, but then it comes for your clinical knowledge, but then it comes to your exam, and going through Anki on how to do a cardiovascular exam might not be the way it works for you. On the other hand, Anki might work for somebody else for a cardiovascular exam, but learning the clinical knowledge doesn't work for them because they're not the kind of person who learns from their own notes. So being flexible to having multiple different ways to learn the same thing is also fine. You don't have to have the perfect set of notes for every single topic and do those notes in the exact same way, which is something that I do as somebody who is a very organized and likes things to look very same and organized and pretty. It doesn't work for med school, and it can drive you insane very quickly if you let it. So being open to different techniques and pre-planning is key. So what I said about my T year, which is the first preclinical year at St. George's, is at the beginning of the year, if I hadn't looked at everything that we need to cover, all the different ways of learning, I would have spent a lot of time in my IOD sessions, so the pathophysiology that I talked about, going over a lot of stuff, and then gone into my lectures and not linked the fact that we're duplicating a lot of information, which would have lost me a lot of time, a lot of hours studying, prepping notes, rather than doing it all in one go and bringing similar tasks together and having the outcome that I wanted by the end of the year. So it saved me a lot of time revising, a lot of time not wasted. So common questions, we're almost there. How do I balance my studies with my life? So a lot of people in a lot of the sessions that Study Hub has run at the beginning of the year, specifically for St. George's students previously, but now we're open to all the universities. But previously we'd run a lot of sessions on how to get through T year, P year, final year, all of the different years. And a lot of questions that kept coming up were, how do I balance studies with my life? I work, I do sports, or all sorts of things. We've covered a lot today, but my main thing, my main top tip, I guess, is to use your grey time and respect your you time. But I'll get on to what that means in a second. But however, I will say, if you haven't watched Made on Netflix, watch it. It's very good. It was #2 in the UK 2 days ago, but it might have changed now. But if you have watched it, you'll realize that she becomes a single mother, and she needs to do so much stuff in one day when her life basically gets turned upside down, but she manages. She has the same 24 hours in a day as you and I do, but somehow she's gotten so much done previously than she has in her other days because she just has to do it. And in terms of a real life application to that, because although that technically can be real life, some people do experience that. My own experience is in my second year of my biomedical degree, I had to have a proper full-time job because I didn't get a proper maintenance loan. So I had to work just about 40 hours a week as a like a carer, home visit carer, doing nights and some day shifts. And I found the time to then study by using grey time and other things like that. A lot of people are also parents or have caring responsibilities of their own within their family. So you end up having to make use of that time. Not everybody is like that. Not everybody has to work. Not everybody has children or other people that they need to care for. However, you have the same amount of time as those people. The difference is that you are not making use of your grey time at the moment. So you spend a lot of time doing other tasks that you, well, not doing other tasks, but you spend a lot of time wasted in those grey blocks. So spending time cooking, traveling, getting dressed, all of these things that you do that you don't realize how much time it's actually taking up. You could be doing something that could be useful. And then that means that because you haven't got time, you haven't got a child to look after, a parent to look after, or a job to go to, you can spend that time doing something you actually want to do, rather than spending that time studying and using all the waste and having wasted all that grey time. So use grey time, respect you time. Use grey time. So there's multiple things you can do. Past Test has an app, a question bank app that's really good without Wi-Fi, so it can be used on the underground. QuesMed also does have an app. QuesMed's app is really good as well. I did have both Past Test and QuesMed, and I tended to use QuesMed more on the wards, only because their offline app at the time wasn't as good as Past Tests. I don't know if they've upgraded now, but they had a lot of bugs before. But they were working on it, so it might be the same as Past Test now, but Past Test was absolutely fantastic for that. So I used that in my grey time. When I was doing things like washing the dishes, cooking dinner, I'd listen to podcasts. Even if I'm not actively paying too much attention, some of that information is going in. A good podcast or good resource for that is Zero to Finals, completely free. But he has podcasts that match his notes and are very easy to follow. And he also has YouTube videos which then explains them. And he has most of his flashcards free on Instagram as well for the active recall. And then respecting you time. I am not the best person to say because I don't really respect my time, but you can get very, very stressed if you end up having no time left for yourself. You need to have time out. And I do notice it in my own life when I don't take time for myself. You can't spend your whole life studying. And if you are spending all your time studying, all your time doing everything related to medicine, just think, is this sustainable? Will I be happy as a doctor if I am doing this? Because as a doctor, there are still things to learn. There are still exams to pass. Even as a consultant, there are still things you have to do. So make sure you're balancing your life and thinking of you. Most of us get that the wrong way round. So we respect our grey time. So we wander around our whole rooms, getting dressed in the morning, spending an hour doing all of that, spending an hour cooking. We respect all of that time as, oh, I have to cook, I have to do this, which you do have to do, but it's also dead time. And you use your you time for the wrong things, i.e. studying when you should have some time for you. And the next question, how do I study when I'm on placement? So I've talked about apps that you can use, but in terms of using your placement wisely, there's lots of things that you can do. There is always something to do, even if your consultant or the doctors you're with act as if they don't want you there. You can be a little bit more proactive and look at notes yourself. You can clerk in patients. You can watch other doctors or other healthcare professionals clerk or talk to patients and think to yourself, what would you do differently? What would you do? What, have you asked any questions that are the same? Or what do you think the outcome of this is going to be? You can play games like that on the wards. You can also help other healthcare professionals. So you can help the nurses, you can help the physios do their roles. So you can help turn a patient, or you can help set up a drip or a fluid bag or whatever you want to call it. Because those skills will probably come in useful. There will probably be a time when you are maybe going through your A&E rotation, and you might be able to help by putting up a fluid bag. And as a doctor, there might be a time where you might be needing to do that by yourself because there isn't a nurse around to help you in an emergency situation. And then finally, know when to leave. So if all of that isn't working, if you're not getting something out of it that's useful for you, know when to leave, to go home, to do other tasks that are important as well. I'm overwhelmed and I feel behind compared to my peers. So just remember that you are a med student. You're not trying to be a consultant tomorrow. Even consultants don't know it all. They specialize and they get really good at their given area. So when they're asking you all the many questions on wards and quizzing you, they're passionate about their topic, remember that, and they have studied it and studied it and studied it enough to be called a consultant and the person people go to about their given problem within their field of expertise. You don't need to be that. You need to be a med student who knows a little bit about everything in order to be able to identify it, to pass it on to the right problem. Is this a heart problem? Is this a brain problem? You know, and then pass it on. And also need to know what you can actually treat, because you don't want to pass on something that you should be able to treat yourself as a foundation doctor. So aim for that rather than aiming for expert. And also recognize that everybody has strengths and weaknesses. It's bad to label yourselves as things as well, but I know I will never be great at neuro, even though I probably shouldn't say that, I should try. So I know that's one of my weaknesses, and I accept that when my results come through, but I am good at obs and gynae. So there's different things that everybody will be good and bad at, and don't let that get you down when you are on your neuro rotation and you're suffering. Not that everybody hates neuro. So applying this to life, start today. Analyze your routine this week. Use the 24-hour challenge if you need to. Record how much time you are spending on different things. Think about how much time you need to sleep, how much time you need to study each week, or how much time you want to dedicate to studying each week, and then average that out through the days and develop your own 24-hour time blocking plan, whether it's time blocking or whether it's hourly scheduling, or whether it's just kind of having a general idea about how you want your week to look. Look through my recommended resources. They are very good. I've tried to be very tried to think of all the different mediums that people can learn from. So have a look at them if you haven't heard of them before. They are really, really good. And I put a lot of time into which ones I would recommend, because there are hundreds more. But I think those are really, really good ones. And find a buddy to keep you on track. Quite sadly, mine is my mum. I do live with my mum, but also the reason that I picked my mum as my keeping on track buddy is because sometimes when the time is right, she scares me. So I make sure that I am on track. You don't want to find somebody who you can keep making excuses to. And my mum is the person who I will tell, I need to get this task done by this. And I know that if I am lazy or if I am not doing anything, she will make sure I am on track. There's nothing embarrassing about using a parent or using a sibling or somebody close to you. It doesn't have to be a friend, or it can be a complete stranger. So somebody, well, not a stranger, but somebody you live with who you're not necessarily close with, if they will keep you on track. So yeah, that is basically the end of the talk.